You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
Hello, and welcome to Adventures in TV Land. For today's video, I've come to Salem, Illinois, to visit the boyhood home of William Jennings Bryan. Now, William Jennings Bryan was a hugely important political figure in the late 1800s and the early 1900s in American politics. He was a three-time presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. He was also a member of the House of Representatives at one point and served for several years as Woodrow Wilson's Secretary of State. He's probably most famous and most well-known for being the lawyer who stood up in opposition of evolution at the famous Scopes trial. Now, surprisingly, Scopes was actually a person who was from Salem, Illinois as well. Anyway, we are here today because William Jennings Bryan boyhood home is here in Salem, and we're here to go check it out. And there it is, the boyhood home of William Jennings Bryan. Now, the tours are on the second and fourth Sunday of each month, 12 to 3 p.m. This is on the local Register of Historical Places. When you enter the house, there's this picture of Bryan. This first room was the original north parlor. It's designed as his campaign room, showing the three different presidential campaigns that Bryan ran during his life. Here's the life mask in the hands of both Bryan, his wife. They were made by Gutzon Borglum, who made Mount Rushmore, designed Mount Rushmore. Bryan had several canes. There's some of his canes and a few of his books in that little display area there. Famous conclusion of his Cross of Gold speech. Now, Bryan was the first presidential candidate to ride in an automobile in 1896 here in Decatur, Illinois. He's riding there in a Mueller car. There's Bryan's typewriter. He would write things out or speak them, and his wife actually typed out all of his speeches. Here is a campaign poster from 1900 in his re-election campaign against McKinley. Here are just some personal items. There's a personal photograph, some books, some shoes, a top hat, a gavel, some photographs from places he traveled overseas. Now, this room is the south parlor, and there are more personal artifacts in here. The bookcase and that desk and some other items all belong to William Jennings Bryan. The bust there in the corner was found underneath the front porch here. This room here is the original dining room. There you see his military uniform. Bryan was a pacifist, but he had a regiment in the Spanish-American War of the militia from Nebraska he was in charge of. There is his chair. That was his chair when he was the Secretary of State in Washington, D.C. Now these items here, these are paperweights. They were actually made from army swords that were beaten down into the shape of a plowshare, and he gave them out to all the countries he visited, and he kept one for himself. Here are some photos from the famous Scopes trial in Dayton, Tennessee. Here's a photograph. I believe it was a family reunion, and this was taken right here on the front porch of this very house. You can see William Jennings Bryan there in kind of the background. Here is the original Brian Bennett Library. This was the first library here in Salem. The funds, and it was built and designed by Brian. It doesn't look like it did when he built it originally because of a storm in the 1930s, but designed by William Jennings Bryan. Just about a mile away from the house, I am now at William Jennings Bryan Park. And just across the street from the park, there is the William Jennings Bryan statue. We're going to take a look at that too. And here is a historical marker about Salem itself. The third paragraph there speaks about William Jennings Bryan. Now this statue of Bryan was displayed in Washington, D.C. It was created by Gutzon Borglum, the gentleman responsible for sculpting Mount Rushmore, as well as Stone Mountain and many other sculptures in the United States. And it was unveiled in a ceremony in 1934 by President Franklin Roosevelt. And it stood in Washington for about 20-some years. But then it was moved and actually was laid down in a park to make way for some bridge construction on the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge. And it was never erected again in Washington, D.C. It lay there for several years. And the people of Salem, they found out about it. And in 1961, they actually got permission from the Secretary of the Interior to have the statue loaned to the city of Salem. The people of Salem, they raised a bunch of funds. They came, they picked up the statue and brought it here to Salem. Meanwhile, in Washington, the people there, Washington, D.C., they didn't realize about it, and the statue that was laying on its side in this park suddenly disappeared, and there was a little bit of controversy about it. They were reported there was a bunch of hoodlums and toughs that had stolen the statue out in the middle of the night, which was not the case at all. And in 1973, the United States House of Representatives actually gave a quitclaim deed to the city of Salem with all interest to the statue. That was a brief look at William Jennings Bryan boyhood home. He lived here in Salem, I believe, for the first 20-some years of his life. They didn't live in that house that whole time. They moved to a farmhouse out in the even farther out of the city limits then. But for the first several years of his life, and he was actually probably born in that house right there in Salem, Illinois. William Jennings Bryan, one of the greatest orators in American history. This has been another adventure in TV land. If you've liked this video, hit that like button. If you disliked, hit the dislike button. If there's some place that you would like to see me visit, or you have a suggestion about some future video you'd like to see me do, leave a comment in the comment section. And if you've enjoyed this adventure or any of the adventures in TV land, you can help support this channel by going to Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon, or even here on YouTube and becoming a member, or you can just hit the super like button down below. Thank you for watching. Until next time, that's a wrap.